تسمية النائب الأستاذ فنان سلام.
Good afternoon. It is Sunday, April 14th. I'm Yumna Naufal, and these are today's headlines. Future Bloc MP Fouad Samira hosts a dinner for the Liberal organization and speaks of Premier designate Tamam Salam. President Bashar al-Assad's forces destroyed the minaret of the historic Omari Mosque, where Syria's uprising erupted 2 years ago in Daraa. And U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrives in Japan, the last stop on an Asian tour aimed at reining North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Future Bloc leader Fouad Samira hosted a dinner for the Liberal International delegation in honor of bilateral agreements and talks between the Future Bloc and the European organization. Samira took the opportunity to address the current government situation in Lebanon. His words.
Today in Lebanon, a new Prime Minister designate is forming a cabinet. He shares with us the same core liberal values, and we will give him all the support he needs to succeed. We will help him form a government that revives the spirit, the true spirit of Lebanon. Lebanon, the message in the region and in the world. And we will fight with Prime Minister designate Salam to ensure holding the parliamentary elections within the constitutional time frame, because we simply cannot accept to put our decades-old democracy on hold at a time when democracy is being fought for in the Arab world with flesh and blood. And since we are talking about the Arab world, let me share with you a few thoughts. Of course, there were some setbacks in the Arab Spring. Setbacks in the Arab Spring quest for freedom and democracy. We have seen parties that don't share our liberal values of openness and inclusion win elections in post-Arab Spring political orders. We still see every day the atrocities of a brutal regime in Syria that is willing to burn its own country and slaughter its own people to remain in power. We are seeing as well the increasing power of some radical forces who have taken the streets in certain Arab countries, fighting and threatening the liberal face of Arab societies.
The elections of members of the Higher Islamic Council are taking place as we speak, according to Dar al-Fatwa. It announced in a statement that the elections have taken place at 10 a.m. in all centers of the authority throughout Lebanon. The Higher Islamic Council elects the Mufti and organizes the affairs of Dar al-Fatwa, Lebanon's top Sunni religious authority. Grand Mufti Sheikh Mohammed Rashid Kabbani stressed on Friday that a new council will be elected on Sunday, denying reports on any postponement. Divisions within Dar al-Fatwa began to surface last year when the 32-member council extended its own term until the end of 2013, a move Kabbani deemed as illegal. The Mufti refuses to hold or join any meetings at Dar al-Fatwa and called last month for elections of council members to be held on April 14th. Prime Minister-designate Tamam Salam thanked all the Lebanese who congratulated him on his nomination and said he looked forward to everyone's cooperation to form his new government. In a statement issued by his press office, Salam thanked all the Lebanese for their support since he was tasked with forming the cabinet earlier this month. He said, quote, "The sympathy, which I am proud of, puts more responsibility on me and creates an impetus for more work to confront the huge national challenge facing us and the formation of the cabinet of national interest." Earlier this week, Salam said he was switching to the off mode and would not make any statements to the media during the process of cabinet formation. The PM-designate faces a difficult task over the March 8 alliance's insistence to form a national unity cabinet and March 14 coalition's call for a government whose members are not running in the parliamentary elections. The deputy head of Hezbollah's Executive Council and a Hezbollah MP called for understanding among the rival political parties to avoid a new crisis on the formation of the new cabinet, which they said should represent all political parties. Lebanon is based on understanding, whether in the formation of the government or the electoral law, said Sheikh Nabil Kaouk, the council's deputy leader, during a seminar organized by a cultural center in Nabatiyeh. He added that the unanimity that Lebanon witnessed during the nomination of Tamam Salam should be reflected on other major developments in the country. Kaouk called for a government that includes the representatives of the nation, a reflection of the call made by the Hezbollah-led March 8 alliance to form a national unity cabinet. President Bashar al-Assad's forces destroyed the minaret of the historic Umari Mosque, where Syria's uprising erupted 2 years ago in the southern city of Daraa. According to opposition activists in amateur video footage they uploaded on YouTube, the mosque can be seen at the end of a street, its towering minaret toppling over after apparent shelling and crumbling into rubble and dust. Other videos posted online show the mosque, which is thought to date back to the 7th century, had been targeted in shelling for several days. The opposition Syrian National Council said the regime of unrestrained barbarism targeted with tanks the minaret of the Umari Mosque, a place full of symbols of civilization and spirituality and humanity. The council noted the mosque had played a pivotal role in the beginning of the uprising against Assad, which sprung in large part from the city of Daraa after the arrest and torture of 2 boys. Coming up next, Israeli researchers say it should one day be possible to grow human eggs in a laboratory, making possible new treatments for infertility. Stay with us. Welcome back. National emergency officials in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries met in Saudi Arabia to discuss the risk of radiation spreading over the Gulf if Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant is damaged by another earthquake. A 6.3 magnitude earthquake struck close to Iran's only nuclear power station last week, killing dozens of people, but leaving the nearby plant undamaged, according to Iranian officials and the Russian company that built it. There is no indication of any radiation leak following last week's tremor, and the head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization said the plant was built to withstand much bigger quakes. But the plant on earthquake-prone Iran's southern coast is a growing worry for its neighbors because of the prevailing winds of the Gulf, which mean that if radiation ever does escape, it will probably be blown over the Qatari capital Doha and the main oil exporting ports of the United Arab Emirates. John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, has arrived in Japan, the last stop on an Asian tour aimed at reining North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Kerry held talks with his Japanese counterpart, Fumio Kishida, just a day before North's biggest holiday of the year, the Day of the Sun, the birthday of state founder Kim Il-sung. The day is an occasion for pomp and perhaps a military display. The North's state media, one of the few ways of glimpsing what is happening in the reclusive country, has so far ignored Kerry's talks in Beijing and Seoul. This comes after Kerry met China's senior leaders in Beijing in a bid to persuade them to push reclusive North Korea, whose sole main ally is China, to scale back its belligerence and return to nuclear talks.
We really want to focus people on the better alternative. And we don't want to get into threat for threat or, some kind of confrontational language here. There's been enough of that. Because cybersecurity affects everybody. It affects airplanes in the sky, trains on their tracks. It affects the flow of water through dams. It affects transportation networks, power plants. It affects the financial sector, banks, financial transactions. Every aspect of nations in modern times are affected by use of cyber networking. And obviously, all of us, every nation, has an interest in protecting its people, protecting its rights, protecting its infrastructure. And so we are going to work immediately on an accelerated basis on cyber.
Now for world news in brief, Venezuela has stepped up security with polls set to open in a crucial presidential election that would determine the country's next leader following the death of Hugo Chavez. Soldiers and police took to the streets of the capital, Caracas, on the eve of Sunday's election, pitting Chavez's hand-picked successor, Nicolas Maduro, and his younger rival, Enrique Capriles, governor of the state of Miranda, who is promising change in a polarized Venezuela. Indonesian investigators began working to determine what caused a new Lion Air passenger jet to miss a runway while landing on the resort island of Bali, crashing into the sea without causing any fatalities among the 108 on board. The National Transportation Safety Committee is examining the wreckage of the Boeing 737 that snapped in half before coming to a stop in shallow water near Bali's airport. About 200 opponents of Margaret Thatcher's filled London Trafalgar Square in the rain for a party to celebrate the former British Prime Minister's death earlier this week. Thatcher's most strident critics have long vowed to hold a gathering in central London following her passing, and the festivities on Saturday were an indication of the depth of the hatred which some Britons still feel for their former leader. Israeli researchers say it should one day be possible to grow human eggs in a laboratory from an amniotic membrane, making possible new treatments for infertility requiring no egg donor. The scientists grew mature versions of the cells using tissue from the sac that protects the baby in the womb. Normally, after birth, the membrane and the placenta to which it is connected are discarded. But according to Professor Eliezer Shalev, Dean of the Rappaport Faculty of Medicine of the Technion Israel Institute of Technology, it is possible the membrane could become a valuable source of eggs for infertile women. If successful, the study could radically expand the options for infertile couples, allowing the manufacturing of an unlimited egg supply and removing the need for egg donors. While academically the study presents significant potential for future infertility treatments, Shalev says it will take several years of research before such treatments become viable.
The origin of these cells is coming from a very early stage in embryonic life. In the 8 days of life of the embryo, there is a part of the embryo which is called epiblast, and it can be used for producing, it's acting like stem cell-like cells. So since from this part of the embryo starts what we are calling germ line, meaning the cells that are going to produce oocytes in the female and spermatid in the male, we thought that we can take these cells and try to induce them to become germ cells and then primary oocytes and then mature oocytes that will be able to fertilize and luckily used as a oocyte for donation. People who are suffering from infertility know there is a lack of oocytes for infertility treatment. So that's the first goal, which still will need a lot of work to do. The second goal is to use this kind of model for understanding the physiology of ovulation and the production of oocytes in the normal physiological events.
That wraps up the news today. Let me remind you of the top stories. Future Bloc MP Fouad Samira hosts a dinner for the Liberal organization and speaks of the current situation with Premier-designate Tamam Salam. President Bashar al-Assad's forces destroyed the minaret of the historic Omari Mosque, where Syria's uprising erupted nearly 2 years ago in Daraa. And U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrives in Japan, the last stop of an Asian tour aimed at reining North Korea's nuclear ambitions. That's all from me and the news team here on Sunday. Have a good week ahead and take care.
تسمية النائب الأستاذ فنان سلام.